All praises to the Most High, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Raha Kodash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, laboring in His truth in all sincerity. 2 Esdras 14, verses 16 and 17. For yet greater evils than those which thou hast seen happen shall be done hereafter. For look how much the world shall be weaker through age, so much the more shall evils increase upon them that dwell therein. So the video I'm about to play is in Spanish. This is the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. So it's going to be in Spanish, but the English subtitles or subcaptions are going to be towards the bottom of the actual video itself as it's playing.
Nuestro objetivo es que este año, a través de los esquemas que trabajemos con la banca, hagamos obligatorio el pago de las gasolinas y de las casetas a través de manera digital. Esto va a permitir potenciar los pagos digitales accesibles que nos permitan avanzar en la digitalización del país a través de muchos otros esquemas.
Okay, so I got this video off of this particular new YouTube channel, well, X channel, I should say. And this is an individual by the name of Mr. Nobody. His handle is at capital M, Mr. capital N, Nobody. Mexico moving to digital currency. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. And I'm pretty sure she is a small hat who happens to be the president of Mexico. But Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum announced at the 89th Banking Convention in Cancun that cash payments at gas stations and toll booths will now officially be phased out. Digital payments are set to become mandatory for fuel and tolls by the end of 2026. That is this year. This is her speaking now in quotations. Our goal this year is to make digital payments mandatory for fuel and tolls through the models we are developing together with the banks, Steinbaum said. And if you remember in the video just now, when she stated that, that was the phrase that she stated. That's when she was talking and she received that round of applause. And I'll read that again. Our goal this year is to make digital payments mandatory for fuel and tolls through the models we are developing together with the banks. This is intended to strengthen accessible digital payment methods and drive the country's digitalization forward in many areas and many other areas as well. This move, and this is the actual poster himself typing this now. This is no longer her speaking. This move is part of a bigger push to digitize the Mexican economy and reduce reliance on cash. Do you see where this is heading? So he asked an interesting question there, and we know where it's heading. This is actually heading to the MOTB. This is just another country that has now basically stepped up, and they're trying to help lead the charge into this brave new world. And I say that without trying to sound too cliche there, but that is what this is. You've probably heard that cliche before. You know, we're stepping into a brave new world. So this is the next phase of it, in Mexico with their small hat president is trying to help lead the way there. So I am going to go to Google AI overview for a quick second here. Okay, so I typed in, this is Google AI overview, and I typed in Mexico moving towards digital currency. I just came across this today, earlier this evening. I came in from camp, and this is one of the first things that I saw online and decided to make a video about this. Mexico is Mexico is actively developing a central bank digital currency, CBDC, known as the digital peso, to enhance financial inclusion and modernize its payment system. While an initial 2024 launch target was delayed, development continues, aiming for faster, cheaper, and safer transactions for both bank and unbanked residents. The digital peso, Banco de Mexico, Banco, is developing a legal, non-crypto, fully regulated digital peso that will coexist with physical cash. The main goals are to boost financial inclusion, reduce cash usage, currently used in 80% of transactions, and provide faster digital alternatives for payments. I'm going to skip digital infrastructure timeline and testing. The project is experiencing delays with expectations moving towards 2025/2026, focusing on infrastructure and legal frameworks. And as we heard in the video, this is going to go into effect by late this year. So somewhere probably anywhere between October through December of this year is when this is going to go into effect in Mexico, where they will be using their new CBDC, which is the digital peso. So, and once again, we can see here where it says that this is going to coexist with physical cash. Now, that's only in this transitional period. They're not going to just say, okay, we're going to the digital currency and just wipe away with cash just off the rip. No, it's going to be this is a transitional period here. So in order to get people ready and, moving into this next phase of what their monetary system is becoming, it's going to coexist with cash for a temporary basis. But that's not going to be permanent. The idea is to get rid of cash altogether. The more cash the public has, the more control over their own lives that they have. It's only through a means of some type of regulated digital currency that the government now has complete control over the individuals in that society. With cash, they don't really have that type of control over an individual. And this is just like, just to reiterate that point there, in China, they still use cash, even though they've completely moved on to a social credit system. So, but China still uses cash basically in 80% of all of its transactions, but the vast majority of their transactions though are pretty much moving towards mobile-based apps. So, of course, we've all seen that footage of, where there's hundreds, maybe even thousands of like homeless Chinese people because their social credit scores have dropped too low. So the only reason why these CBDCs would start off as coexisting with cash, first and foremost, is to give that majority, the majority of the population, I should say, time to get used to a new monetary system. After that, or what they normally do, or what they would try to do, I should say, is get rid of the older generation. The generation that will probably be, 70 through 85 or even older. You pretty much wait for them to die out. Now it should be easier, people that's around 65 and younger, especially if you're in your 20s, 30s, early to mid 40s, you'll have no problem making a transition. The people that's going to struggle a little bit more would be the people that's probably late 40s throughout their 50s, early to mid 60s. They'll struggle a little bit. So the whole purpose is to give them some time. And this is why you keep cash. This is why you will allow this particular new digital currency to coexist with cash. But and this is actually what we're seeing now. So when you see this here that it's coexisting with physical cash, that's a temporary thing, and that's something that we just have to keep in mind, that they are going to do away with cash altogether. So it's just nothing more than a transitional stage at this point right here. So that's why, let's scroll back down though. towards, and I didn't read this initially, but let's scroll down to future implications. The move aims to bring more of the population into the formal financial system and reduce dependence on physical cash, especially in rural areas. However, the shift faces challenge. However, the shift faces challenges regarding privacy concerns and the strong, deeply rooted reliance on cash in the Mexican economy. When you look at the Southeast and Midwest, it's actually harder for the government to control the people who live there. Most of those people are self sufficient. A huge percentage of them, they plant their own foods. A lot of them have like acres of land, like even like in my grandmother's house before she passed, living in the country in South Carolina. She had acres of lands with even like that wooded area behind the house. That was all part of her land there. So, it's harder for the government to actually control people when they live in that type of environment. You're able to plant your own foods. A lot of the people that live in the South, they're extremely hands on, when it comes to stuff like carpentry, welding, electrical work, many other skills that these types of tradesmen possess. So not only do they basically have the means of sustaining themselves, but pretty much everyone in those little southern, southeastern states and Midwest states, those are Second Amendment proponents. They're all armed, and I mean heavily armed, so it's a little bit harder for the government to control people when they're self sufficient. The government's whole agenda is to make you 100% reliant on them. So, of course, like the ruling class elite, they'll have a harder time gaining control over a population such as the Southeast or the Midwest versus, if you live in the Northeast or you live in any major metropolitan area. It's you can't plant your own food. There's pretty much nothing you can do to where you can basically sustain yourself for any long period of time. Right now, if all the supermarkets closed in the Northeast region, pretty much a lot of people would struggle for days, weeks, maybe even months. Anything happens, any type of, situation where the supermarket's closed or anything to that degree, the Northeast would struggle bad versus people who live in the South, the Southeast, I should say, and the Midwest. They'll fare much better for a way longer period of time. And this is what the government does not want. They don't want you to be self-sufficient. They want you to rely on them. This is why they flat out telling you, you will own nothing and be happy. And this is what I believe the guy's name is. He used to be the head of the WEF, Klaus Schwab, if I'm correct. I believe that's his quote. You will own nothing and be happy. So they've been wanting this for a while. So when it comes to a place like Mexico, it doesn't surprise me that they would start there in this particular hemisphere. Everything that they've done so far has been voluntary. The RFID microchips that we see so far that have been implanted underneath the skin, that's all been voluntary so far. If I'm correct, right now, Mexico is the first country in the Western Hemisphere here where the government is actually saying by the end of this year, this is going to be your brand new monetary system. So let's go to another article that I have real fast here. This is from NBC News. NBC News. Microchips implanted in Mexican officials. Mexico's Attorney General and 160 people in his office have had microchips implanted under their skin as a way of giving them security access in one of the most high-profile human uses yet. So when you scroll down and you look right there, right where that red dot is, look at the sentence right to the right of that. This article was published July 14th, 2004. So once again, this article was published 22 years ago, almost a full 22 years ago. Microchips implanted in Mexican officials. I'm not going to read the entire article because it is 22 years old, but now we see where these microchips that have been implanted well over 22 years ago, and that was basically a trial and error process there. That was with the old Verichip. I do believe that they have gone bankrupt and have been brought out by a brand new company, or by a larger company, I should say. But security has reached a subcutaneous level for Mexico's Attorney General, and at least 160 people in his office, they have been implanted with microchips that get them access to security to secure areas of their headquarters. It's a pioneering application of a technology that is widely used in animals but not in humans. Like I said, I'm not going to read this whole thing because it is 22 years old, but now you can see how it's all starting to come together. Well over 20 years ago, they started implanting people in Mexico with RFID chips. Here we are now, 2 decades later, and now the government is making it mandatory that, now you're about to swap over to your brand new digital peso, your new CBDC. And it's just a matter of time before, these two things merge. So now you can see that we're one step closer to this thing becoming made mandatory. So I'm not going to make this video too long. I'm going to start wrapping it up here, but I would be remiss if I didn't just go to this scripture at least one time throughout this video, Revelation 13 verses 16 and 17, and I'll read this in the NLT. He required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or in the forehead, and no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name. So we've gone into that ad nauseum plenty of times. I'm not going to really dwell on that particular verse or go into too much detail outside of just basically stating that this is the actual scripture here that is completely relevant to what we're seeing now regarding the CBDCs that are this is going to become the new mandatory currency in Mexico by later this year. And of course, they would be starting this in one of the lands where, the tribes are there. So that is the tribe of Issachar primarily on that land. I'm going to also go to 2 Timothy chapter 4. And this is verses 2 and 3. 2 Timothy chapter 4 verses 2 and 3. NLT. Preach the word of Yahweh by Hashem Yahweh Shai. Be prepared whether the time is favorable or not. Patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage your people with good teaching. For a time is coming when people will no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires and look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear. And one thing, listening to the men of GMS, starting with the elder apostles on down to the bishops and, all of the Akim across the country that I've actually sat and have been watching their videos over the past couple of years now. One thing I start realizing is that repetition is not a bad thing. Repeating yourself ad nauseum, repeating yourself constantly going into certain breakdowns, it's not a bad thing at all. It gives the listener the chance to really, it's not a bad thing to beat somebody upside the head with something that's important. I'll make it just that simple. It gives the listener time to really absorb it, to really understand what is going on here. Not just the scripture itself, but how it pertains to what we're actually living in right now and how close we are to the deliverance. So, we're in a society where people tend to lose interest, or they try to use certain talking points or rebuttal points and say things, you may hear them say things such as, this is all you guys talk about. And, when I see these type of comments under certain, videos, especially videos as it pertains to the MOTB, and you see that type of comment, like, this is all you guys talk about, the first thing I do is I keep scrolling first and foremost, but, it always crosses my mind, like, so what, if this is the last thing, we sound the alarm on, then what's the issue, you know? This is a major prophecy that's unfolding right now in our lifetime, and the deliverance won't happen until this is fulfilled as it is written in the book of Revelation. So the men of GMS are simply following instructions. They're following the instructions of Yahweh Bashem and Yahweh Shai. And with that being said, I'm going to end this with Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 17 and 18 in the NLT. Son of man, I have Salakia. Son of man, I have appointed you as a watchman for Israel. Whenever you receive a message from me, warn the people immediately. If I warn the wicked, saying you are under the penalty of death, but you fail to deliver the warning, they will die in their sins, and I will hold you responsible for their deaths. I pray this has been edifying and reaches the ears it's supposed to reach. Shalom.